The most bashful gnome. Oh, hello again. So recently, me and my little buddy, the most bashful gnome, have been spending a lot of time watching the history side of YouTube, learning all kinds of things about different past happenings across the world and in our home nation, the United States. Last night was a video about George Washington, his army, and their winter in Valley Forge where they almost starved to death, resorting to eating wood and apparently even boots and clothing to stay alive. This sparked the little guy to tell me about the wonderful slippery elm tree, which he claims is the very tree that George and his men were eating during that cold winter. Or so his grandpappy, who was supposedly there, says he saw during the time in the great Gnome and Troll Wars of the same year. So without going into all the history of the gnomes and the trolls beef, here's some very neat pieces of information about the slippery elm tree, a plant that we could definitely argue helped the birthing of America. But remember, my dear internet scamp, these videos are educational only. Do not use this information to do anything naughty or dangerous, because each time you do, a fairy dies and a baby Yoda gets kicked across the football stadium. With that out of the way, let's get on to the facts. The slippery elm tree is a mid-sized tree that is native to North America. If you wanted to research it in a fancy way, you'd type in Ulmus rubra to your Google search engine. When flowering, this tree yields rust red colored buds. The growing habits of the slippery elm aren't very picky. It will grow in most any type of soil as long as it has adequate water, and any type of slope as well. The reason it's called a slippery elm is due to the consistency and texture of the inner bark of the tree, which has been used as food by Native American nations for a long time. They actually introduced the plant to colonists, who followed suit to eat it as well for many years. The inner bark is said to have a pleasant scent, and in order to eat it, you typically grind it into a powder and boil it to make a porridge, which is said to be on par in nutrition to your standard bowl of oatmeal. This is exactly what George Washington and his troops are reported to have done for 12 days at Valley Forge. Now, the slippery elm is not just a potential food source, though. It also has many uses medicinally. Herbally, this plant has been used and has been in use since the early 1780s to soothe irritations of the mouth, throat, and intestines. It also has practical applications in the treatment of burns, skin ulcers, and for eye care. It isn't recommended or studied on its effectiveness, but there are some who claim that the slippery elm can be used to treat eczema, acne, and even insect bites as well. Today in your grocery store, you may actually see this plant as an active ingredient in throat lozenges, as it is FDA approved for use in such products, based on studies done way back in the 1800s through the 1930s. No additional studies about its properties or usage have been done in more recent years. As far as it can be ingested, this is akin to its growing habits, in that it's not excessively specific, as it can be made into porridges, teas, capsules, tinctures, topical creams or salves, but as I always must stress, not everything about this plant is entirely safe, so don't get any ideas about self-treatment. And always discuss your ideas and opinions with trained medical professionals first, because side effects exist and they can be undesirable depending on who you are. In the case of slippery elm, It is generally considered to be well tolerated, but if you have a history of gallstones or bile duct obstructions, you'll want to avoid eating this, especially because it can make those problems worse. Slippery elm is a very fascinating plant, and talking about it this whole time generally makes me want to try that porridge one day, after doing my due diligence, of course. Tell me if you've ever had this dish that fed the Revolutionary War soldiers in the chat, or if you'd like to hear more about the history of the North American gnomes, because if the little guy likes anything more than plant lore, it's definitely the history of his people. Until next time, bye! Like and subscribe if you found this information useful and don't want to make gnomes cry.